So, like, what's Vic's damage? At first, as somebody whose disability experiences mirror Rita's, down to the point of, oh God, I might not be able to work in Hollywood, the one thing I've always wanted to do my entire life. What am I gonna do with my life? What am I gonna do? I didn't really like Vic much.
I mean, sure, I always acknowledge that Vic's disabled, but his disabilities had super accommodations. It's to the point where it seemed like Vic almost isn't disabled. I mean, in one of his first scenes in episode 2, he refers to the rest of the team as circus freaks.
How does a band of circus freaks manage to screw up so badly that they lose their leader and the whole entire town at the same damn time?
Holy internalized ableism, Batman!
Vic appears to be putting himself in a position above the team. While Rita also made a reference to carnival grotesques, as I mentioned previously, that was in reference to how she feared being seen, not how she was seeing someone else. Vic's early appearances remind me of something called inspiration porn. It's the idea that disabled people are inherently inspiring. My theory is that since many able people have a fear of becoming disabled, they like to see disabled people succeed because it alleviates those fears. However, it fails to acknowledge all of the ableism in our current society. Think of the news sharing feel-good stories about kids making sacrifices to pay for families' medical care. While that's very kind, they shouldn't have to make those sacrifices in the first place. This is why formerly poor people are also popular topics for inspiration porn. People who aren't in poverty like to believe that it's possible to overcome it, which gives them this sense that if someone else is in poverty, well, why don't they just try to stop being poor like this one person who got lucky? Sometimes disabled people will sort of make themselves into inspiration porn, and they'll say things like, if I can do it, what's stopping you? Which fails to acknowledge that different things might stop different people. This is the crux of the conflict between Vic and Rita. Vic needs to believe that hard work is all it takes, although for some people, like Rita, it could take a lot more than just hard work. But Vic is an ambitious person, and he might think that embodying this inspirational persona might help his chances at joining the Justice League or whatever.
Vic really wants to fit the character mold of inspiring disabled hero. You can tell he's just dying to be, if the theatrics of his introduction are anything to go by. Cyborg is trying really hard to be not just a hero, but like a hero from a movie or something. But then when the girl goes,
"You're Cyborg,"
he just kind of shrugs like,
You can call me Vic.
Later in the episode, there's this moment in the donkey when Mr. Nobody says Vic isn't really a hero, and Vic gives him this motivational sounding speech.
You don't get it. You think forcing me to relive this is torture? I relive this every time I go to sleep. I relive this when I close my eyes. You may know who I am, but you don't know shit about me. If you did, you would know that every criminal I bust and every person I save is me fulfilling a pledge to my mom that she'll never get to hear. Trying to make her proud. Knowing I'm the reason she's not around to see it. That's my burden. That's what it means to be cyborg.
What an origin story.
Vic is trying to fill that mold of the person who doesn't let anything stop him, and he's trying to use his trauma as a means of moving forward. But it's not motivating, it's upsetting, it's traumatizing.
Vic probably doesn't know about Martha and Thomas Wayne, but it's almost like he's trying to be Batman in this avenging sense. But he isn't aware that Batman's like so messed up. Like, see a therapist, Bruce.
I actually think it would be pretty good for Vic to meet Dick Grayson and have a conversation, because I feel like Vic seems to have this idea of who the superhero is and how he has to fit that mold, when in reality superheroes are people too. They have emotions too. Even Superman. And he can shoot lasers out of his eyes.
I think Vic is acting like how he thinks a superhero is supposed to act, but he doesn't really know any well enough to know that trauma and struggling with mental health doesn't make you less of a hero, and is pretty common. I mentioned on Tumblr this theory I have that Vic's kind of a deconstruction of inspiration porn and fear, and I got this great comment by Mean Dauphine, who I believe changed her URL. I've been working on this for a really long time, but I just wanted to share what she said because I love it. I think Vic was fed a lot of motivational platitudes, which helped him deal with and distract himself from the massive physical changes he went through. And as we've seen earlier, he's not entirely sure of whether he believes them or whether they're programmed into him. Vic also has this level of celebrity and thus a measure of social acceptance, although not full. His dating profile thing was rather emotionally crushing to watch, that Larry and Rita won't ever have, and or, most interestingly, that they used to have and will never have again. They all have these different disabilities that affect them at wildly different levels, although Rita and Larry are kind of similar in this regard, which I think led to their codependency for many years. And Vic is starting to see that these platitudes not only don't work for them and don't reflect their real lives, but they also don't affect his either. I love this idea of Vic realizing that while inspiration porn and motivational phrases might help some people in some moments, they aren't universal truths, and they won't save you if you literally can't control your own body. Rita's disability pokes holes in Vic's whole personal philosophy. That being said, Rita and Larry do have way more potential than they realize, and with certain treatments, they can become superheroes, but we only know this because they're fictional characters. We only know this because we have access to all the comics where they are superheroes, and that this is a superhero show on a superhero streaming network. They don't know that, and Vic doesn't know that. Like I said when talking about Rita, it can be really hard to correctly estimate your abilities when you have a disability, and that's terrifying. Vic does seem to be realizing that this philosophy is flawed. When Vic talks in therapy, he says,
Thing is, that story, my guilt, it used to be the well of my strength. It took me so long to accept what happened and who I became. But man, I thought Cyborg was a way to make it all right again.
As he questions whether or not his origin story even happened, he's questioning the philosophies it gave him.
For the record, while I hate inspiration porn, I try not to judge the disabled people who try to be seen that way, and I definitely don't have any negative feelings towards Vic now. And I kind of get it because I'm ambitious, and I could really see him kind of putting this on as an act, you know, fake it till you make it style. He's putting on this persona so he can convince himself that he can be a member of the Justice League. All you have to do is have fun and be yourself.
And I feel like this is backed up by these scenes with Mr. Nobody, who's trying to break him by convincing him that he isn't a hero, and maybe actually is going to hurt people instead. I think it's possible that Vic thinks the best he can do is basically be an inspiration porn type of figure, and I think he's faking it till he makes it. And it ends up being unfair on both himself and the rest of the team. I could leave Vic's piece here, but as I started to think more and more about him as a disabled person who's internalized a lot of potentially ableist platitudes, I realized that his arc mirrors many disabled people in another way, his relationship with his dad. In episode 2, Silas drops this line.
Improving her programming is a full-time job.
When he said this, something clicked in me. Silas is like the parent of a disabled child who assumes that their child can't do certain things and thus exerts very strong amounts of control over them.
Silas going from this heavy involvement to backing off without warning is worsening Vic's problems with controlling Grid. He never gave Vic the skills to be okay on his own, and I'm worried that Vic isn't going to be able to handle the suddenness of that change. I suppose that, like Cliff and FOMO, able-bodied people could also struggle with this, but this is a common thing in disability communities. First, the idea that caring for your child is a full-time job and the implication that it's not what you signed up for is very common among autism warrior moms who act like they deserve a medal for parenting an autistic child.
This makes me angry because people act like they shouldn't have to have a disabled kid, but if you're going to have a kid, you have to sign up for the possibility of that kid being disabled. Even if they aren't born disabled, anybody can become disabled at any time. People don't ask to be born, but you chose to have a child, or at least to raise that child, and I get that it might be difficult, but also as difficult as it is for you, like I said earlier, consider how difficult it is for them maybe. Having this attitude that you didn't sign up to have a disabled kid and, wow, you have to work so much harder than other parents because your kid is disabled, all it really does is makes your disabled child feel like a burden. So maybe don't do that.
For the record, I'm not trying to make a sweeping generalization of parents of disabled people, and I'm aware not all parents of disabled children are guilty of this, but it's something I see far too often. Secondly, Silas not giving Vic the skills out of fear reminds me of this episode of the NPR podcast Invisibilia I was listening to called How to Become Batman. It's not actually about the DC superhero, but it's about this blind man named Daniel Kish, who essentially uses echolocation to see. This works as an incredible accommodation. He's able to hike, rock climb, navigate, and even ride a bike. You'd think that parents of blind children would hear about this and want their children to learn this skill, but many parents are scared of the idea of their blind child putting themselves in a position where they could get hurt. The host of the show noted,
I talked to mothers whose blind kids were pulled off of playground equipment, And perhaps the most chilling thing is the fact that most blind kids will intuitively start clicking or snapping or stamping to test out their environment with sound, but they are so often discouraged.
Similarly, fewer than 10% of legally blind people in the US know Braille. Many parents of deaf children won't teach them sign language, which is a form of language deprivation. According to a Mic.com article, there's no citable research on the number of deaf individuals at risk for language deprivation, but Naomi Caselli, an assistant professor of deaf studies at Boston University, is willing to say it's a majority. There are many disabled people unprepared for living life with their disabilities because their parents didn't give them the opportunities to ease into independent living. Vic seems to be one of these people, and now he needs the team who he used to judge to help him learn how to navigate this world with his conditions.
In conclusion, I love this show. And then I'm going to end on this note from Brendan Fraser that basically validates my whole thesis. Like, I could have just played this clip and been like, okay, that's my video.
He can think and see, can't feel, tact anything. He has no sensation, let alone taste, smell, none of that. So he's challenged with not a malfunction, but he's someone who has a disability. And they all do, in a way, whether it's physical or personal and emotional, or has to dabble with areas that are troubling psychologically, but it's never glossed over.
I love this show. I definitely recommend it, but it's also really kind of ironic and interesting to me how the streaming service with some of the best disability representation, not just this show, but Oracle as well, is a superhero streaming service. Superheroes who are usually like the most able-bodied of the able-bodied. Maybe I should make a video about superheroes and disability, actually. That'd be neat. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're still watching, thank you so much. Please consider liking and subscribing and doing the YouTube stuff. If I get to 1,000 subscribers, I will write that fanfic where Larry gets a little Queer Eye makeover. And I'll read it for all of you. So subscribe so you can see that. Bye.